All right, Jim, what may be and what probably is and what I think is going to be our final question here this week.
Thank you for giving that a full-throated endorsement.
This was sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Chris in Shreveport, Louisiana, your old stomping grounds. As a longtime listener to your podcasts, I have heard several times about how Dusty Rhodes told the boys, quote, by this time next year, we'll be making major movies and sitcoms. I believe it's
No.
pictures.
You had it right. It's major motion pictures and sitcoms, baby.
Well, I'm reading it now as he wrote it. I was trying to correct it, and then I said I'll just read it, and then you corrected it anyway. So that was the quote. My question is this. Why would Dusty think that would happen? Did he think the production companies would be at Crockett's door looking for more over-the-top characters to use in movies and sitcoms? Did he think that companies that could not get deals with the WWF would then come and make deals with JCP? Why on earth would Dusty expect to be making these kind of entertainment extravaganzas, or that entertainment companies would want to hire the NWA wrestlers as opposed to Vince's prepackaged, family-friendly, over-the-top entertainers? It just seems like it was a pipe dream, and also maybe a way to help keep unhappy wrestlers quieted down for a time by making it seem they were all about to be on television and movie stars.
Well, and there's an element of all of that, but the questioner, what was the person's name asking this question?
Chris in Shreveport.
Okay, Chris, here's the thing. The problem is you're looking with today's glasses on yesterday. Vince wasn't there yet either. With this, Dusty said that at a time where Vince didn't have any of his people in a fucking movie. When was Hulk's first movie? Besides Rocky III, that was independent of. I'm talking about when did Vince actually start getting people in movies?
Well, remember, Jesse Ventura did movies, and I was outside of Vince's purview, and he got really
But yeah,
mad
I'm talking about the
and
actual
Piper too.
Vince
Hulk Hogan
people in movies.
No Holds Barred was produced in 1988, released in 89.
Okay, well, this was a couple of years before that. See, that's the thing is that it wasn't as far-fetched as I got a kick out of the line. I was sitting in front of him when he said it on Crockett's plane. And other people heard it too. And of course, Dennis Condrey, I think, rolled his eyes. But it wasn't as far-fetched as you would think in hearing it in the way that the questioner just phrased it. We're at the end of 1986, Jim Crockett Promotions, without any pay-per-view, which didn't exist yet or wasn't a thing in wrestling yet, without any corporate sponsorship, and without TV rights. They didn't get paid for television. They paid to produce their television. Right? So without any internet, which didn't exist, and without any international business because they weren't traveling outside of the United States and Ontario, Canada. In 1986, Crockett grossed over $20 million on ticket sales. That's it. That's basically it. And which would be what? 3 times that today. And it was still a regional territory that it was expanding. But $20 million plus. And we're drawing and selling out 10,000 seat buildings and 15,000 seat buildings already, sometimes twice in a day. And we are currently sitting on, while Dusty's about to say this, that was still on the Jabroni jet, the G1, the Gulfstream, Crockett's first plane. He was about to buy a second one that was a jet instead of a prop jet, so we would eventually have 2 planes. We are on television in every city of any size in the country, doing good radio. I mean, in Charlotte, we can't walk down the fucking street. I've told the story about when I tried to go to the amusement park. We're on TBS as their highest rated program every week. And as a matter of fact, I think this may have been, well, no, that was later on when that Learning the Ropes thing came up. But there was a TV show involved there with Crockett also, with Lyle Alzado.
I was going to ask, is that the ultimate fruition of all this, or is that separate from this?
No, that was a separate thing. It was a Canadian production company, and they probably couldn't work with Vince at that point. So Crockett made very little from that and put very little effort into it. I got a question about that, and I may answer it on the experience this week because somebody emailed about it. But point is, we are in, all the guys that are there know that that is the most successful wrestling promotion that they've ever been a part of, because except for Vince, in the same couple of years, it was the most successful wrestling promotion in the history of the United States, Crockett in 1986. So Dusty's there, and Dusty always, that's the thing. He thought creatively. He had the big ideas, the Starrcade concept. Pay-per-view was right down his alley. I wish it had come along and Crockett had been able to get on it quicker than it happened. So because Dusty learned the big show and the package show same way Watts did from Eddie Graham. And he peaked on those big shows and the Great American Bash and the stadium deals. And he thought big, and sometimes it was too big. We shouldn't have booked all those stadiums in 86. 3 or 4 of them we needed. The rest of them we could have done it indoors. But it was part of the big deal, the big attraction of the Great American Bash Tour. Dusty at that point had ideas for making his own fucking movies, or writing scripts at least with the guys, because these guys were such fucking personalities. So
he wanted to write the scripts.
Oh, he'd tell you ideas on the plane. Brother, I tell you, Bear Windham be the cowboy, and then here come that no good Tully Blanchard, he'd be the way, and it's always a Western usually, but whatever. But a lot of this stuff wasn't going to come to fruition.
Because he wanted to do Westerns.
Well, and also, he was dreaming big with the planes, and he named the plane. One plane was Stardust. The other plane was whatever the fuck it was. He thought big. He had tons of ideas. He created shit. And if you want, that's what you want in a booker rather than a fucking guy who's going to sit around like a bump on a log. Now, Crockett needed to rein him in a little bit more in terms of how quick he wanted to take over the world, because Dusty was also, that was the start of, we already had Kansas City and Florida was coming up. And I don't know whether they were talking at this point about the UWF yet, but Dusty was all over buying all the territories. He wanted to be the one opposition to Vince McMahon, and he wanted to be the booker of it. And he was for a while, and he did a good job at it. But the businessman, Crockett, should have reined Dusty in somewhat, and also should have had a better infrastructure, and that's where everything got sideways. They didn't know they were in the hole until they were way too far in the hole. But having said all that, I will wrap this up. That's why when the guys are sitting there, and that was Dusty's, he's looking around, we're on the plane, everybody's having fun, we've just sold out in Philadelphia or wherever the fuck we're coming back from, 10,000 people. And he said, boys, this time next year, we're going to be making major motion pictures and sitcoms. And yeah, part of it was Dusty's hyperbole, but at the same time, here we're making a couple $100,000 a year, 30-something years ago. We're flying around in a private plane, selling out fucking arenas every night. Maybe that ain't that far fucking fetched. But it became a quote later on that everybody started making fun of, like, how could he ever think that? Well, actually, it was done in the wrestling business. He just wasn't able to be in the spot long enough to see it done, but Vince ended up doing it with the guys, made major motion pictures and sitcoms without a lisp.
If you were in charge, would you have done the purchase of any of those, of Florida in 87, of Kansas City? Was any of that actually worth it? And was there any voice actually saying, I guess to Dusty more than anyone else, because Dusty had Crockett's ear, this is a bad idea. They're going to go out of business if we don't buy them. What are we buying?
Well, the rest of the family didn't, because already they had started talking, and Dusty loved Texas. He's from Texas. And Crockett was fixated on Dallas as being a media center and they rented those offices in Dallas, especially when they took over the UWF. They had the office in Dallas and blah, blah, blah. And David and Jackie and Francis didn't want to leave the Carolinas, and they didn't particularly want to run a national promotion. But it was almost getting to the point where, and judging by everybody, all the other territories, if you didn't run a national promotion and try to compete with Vince, everybody, well, then that's it. You're fucking done. So damned if you do, damned if you don't, as Mama Cornette used to say. But Crockett and Jimmy and Dusty were all in on, we're going to be based out of Dallas, Texas, a major media center. We got the production company who can work with down there. We're going to have the syndication and get all this advertising money and pay-per-views, a thing that's coming up. So we've got to have all they didn't buy the promotions for the promotions or the talent rosters. They bought them for the televisions. And especially the UWF. That was the whole idea.
Right.
Kansas City.
Right. UWF more than the other two for the TV.
Well, Kansas City was to be a developmental territory. And that's why, at first he sent Bubba out there to be Big Bubba, to be the singles champion on his own, because he wanted Bubba to get experience. Kansas City was going to be the developmental place, and the place that you sent guys if you didn't have anything for them, or you brought guys into the program through that. Florida, I hate to say it, but Florida was probably a bad idea, because after Eddie Graham, the business had already gone down. And then once that Crockett took it over, and it was a lot of TV tapings and et cetera, and it wasn't the local Florida promotion anymore, then the people down there revolted even farther than they already had, because Florida had been so strong. When you have an area where a promotion has been exceptionally strong for a long time, and then it goes away and another one comes in, the other one has a hell of a time following it. And that's, with Canada, they did a survey several years ago. In each province, how many people considered themselves a pro wrestling fan and how many didn't? And the highest percentage of people in a province in Canada that considered themselves wrestling fans, guess the two provinces.
Quebec and Ontario.
No, Ontario and Alberta.
Oh, Alberta.
Because of Calgary.
I was thinking of Montreal.
Montreal, but it had been a while longer. Montreal is a big, huge metropolitan city. Calgary, the legends lasted longer. The hearts were more over. And then Ontario, just because of Toronto. But point being, Florida was dead and was going to die, and they should have, and there weren't enough TV outlets to make it worth it. But because of Dusty's, I think because of everybody's, I don't want to say love for the Florida territory, but just the reverence that Florida wrestling had, we got to have this place, and we'll get the TVs, and it's right below Georgia. So it's adjacent to our already established territory, blah, blah, blah. But that didn't work out. It was a drain. And
would it have been cheaper? Here's a question. Would it have been cheaper if Dusty and Crockett did Vince's business model and just went to the station and said, we'll give you more money than you're getting right now? Would that have actually been the cheaper proposition for every one of those stations?
It probably would have worked, because I don't think the Florida stations were getting any money at that point. I pretty much guarantee you Eddie Graham didn't give a TV station a fucking penny in Florida, but for all those years, but it was the highest rated program that anybody could get in Florida, so they took it. But if they just went in and started running it, that may have been but they couldn't do that to Mike Graham, and they couldn't have blah, blah, blah. And there was Buddy Colt, I think, was still involved at that point, wasn't he? Or what? Anyway, but the biggest problem was the UWF. They bought that specifically for the television network that Watts and Jim Ross had assembled, because they were the number 3 ranked promotion in terms of television coverage. And JR had been assembling that syndicated network to try to fight Vince. But when their core business in the Mid-South territory went under, they couldn't afford the weekly nut. Watts was spending a fortune. And he said, fuck it. I'll sell, and Crockett, and that's another reason why people said, oh, they botched the UWF invasion. Well, they did. They could have introduced those guys stronger or better, but they didn't really botch something that they never really bought the company to do. They bought the UWF for the TV time slots. And it wasn't going to be a big invasion, and it wasn't going to be a big promotional rivalry. If they could have got that, it was, but, at the same time, Dusty then had to figure, well, I got to keep the Horsemen and the Midnight Express and, all of my top guys that are the rock and roll, if they were still there at that point. They left around that time. Whoever the top guys were that had been with him for Crockett, he had to keep them happy. He couldn't bring in guys that had stood out in a territory that wasn't going to be doing any business at the gate and start putting them over his established guys that were still doing business in the areas that Crockett was established, the Carolinas, Philadelphia, Baltimore. Yes, long term, it would have given more matchups, and meant more, and those guys would have had a better shot, but there's too many of them. It came too fast, and it was just a clusterfuck. So, but that's the thing, and that's what doomed Crockett, was trying to put together that syndicated TV network that could compete with Vince, with the advertisers and the sponsors that they were alleged that they would get if they got, what was it back in those days, Brian? If you had syndicated clearance in, was it 80% of the country or 85%? You could charge full advertising rates for a national program.
I'm not sure.
There was a formula for it back then. And that's why Jerry Springer or, fucking whatever, Wheel of Fortune, whatever, any genre of syndicated program had to reach a certain threshold of percentage of the country. And it was definitely high 70s, if not 80. And then you would be considered as having pretty much full national coverage to sell national ad packages. And they were trying to take all those stations that UWF had, add them to their own, to the meager ones they got from Kansas City and Florida. And they got that coverage level. But because they were the second one in the game and they were unproven, and it was under a variety of banners, the Wrestling Network, this was worldwide, this was Crockett, this was formerly UWF, whatever. Vince still had the fucking lead in syndicated television ad sales, even if the ratings were comparable, which they were. There you go.